contemporary fishery, aside from market issues we'll talk about shortly, is operating pretty well. Let's hear from a few fishers about today's fishery as they see it, and hear a little bit about the differences between the southern and northern zones.
Well, the good things are just not knowing what you're going to catch every day. Like it's an adventure. Every day is an adventure. You concentrate on putting the pots in the right spot, but there's no guarantees you're going to catch. There's no guarantees of how much you're going to catch. I think my worst day ever is 4 fish, I think I caught, out of 72 pots. And we were going out expecting to catch a good catch, but how wrong was I? Last year when we got closed down for the coronavirus, we'd had our pots on deck and no one had been fishing for 6 weeks. So we thought, well, we're going to get some good catches because no one's fished in the zone for that long, and went over there on our first lift we got 5 fish. So it makes you scratch your head.
Sustainable and resilient. We don't want to go down the road of years back where we fished it down and it struggled to come back. You know, it's better off just look after it. And I think pretty much all the fishermen across it now, they understand how good it is at the moment, and everybody's making a little bit of money. So, yep, for me, just keep on that incline, make sure that it's sustainable, resilient to anything that comes along. If there's any climatic changes or anything like that, it's still going to be good.
If it was one thing extra that would help fishermen or myself be a better fisherman, I would say the mapping on the bottom. I try to relate the bottom to a mainland, like the big caves and the big cliffs and those things. But when you're fishing out in the deep water and these unbelievable ledges come up, you'd like to see what they really look like in real life kind of thing. So I think that would be fantastic to see. The difference between the northern and the southern zone, obviously I've fished in the southern zone for a long time, and I purchased a northern zone licence about 10, 12 years ago. And the difference between the two zones were huge. You wouldn't think so, but the two zones are incredibly different. The northern zone is probably harder to fish in a few different ways. Like, you're out there for 5 or 6 days at a time. Every day you've got to load your pots on. You cannot put a pot back in the northern zone, even if you've got a double figure pot, it won't fish. You can come back in probably 5 days' time and fish that area again. But so you pick them up. I think you become more of a hunter over there, because if you don't do it properly, you won't catch much. So yeah, it was a huge difference for me for the first few years. And then to find bottom, that I've never fished over there before. So yeah, it took me probably 4 years before I kind of thought I could catch fish over there comfortably. And when I finished, it was, yeah, it's a good industry, the northern zone. It's different, but there's some really good fishing spots over there. And like, as for the southern zone, well, that's just getting better. The southern zone is probably a great industry. We've looked after it, and we've shown getting probably the areas now that we used to fish are probably still the same where they were 20 years ago. So we're getting the rewards for looking after an industry in the southern zone.
Yeah, I've been going out on the cray boat with my uncle since I was 5 years of age, now 38, nearly 39. Been driving a boat for the last 15 years, and a decade prior to that, from when I left school. There's been a lot of changes in the industry since then, and yeah, gone from 60 boats down to, well, I think it was actually 70 boats back then in '99, down to about 40 in the zone. A lot of it's changed in the fact that it's not so much owner-operator anymore, it's more investor-orientated. So people like myself, I work for a family that owns 2 boats, and they own them. They're Australians that own them, where other people are driving boats for other companies who are then owned overseas, generally New Zealand, which has been a big change in this industry. In the last few years, there's been a lot of changes as far as trialling a bit of outer zone fishing or winter fishing, which I've been a part of this year due to the coronavirus. I have to admit I was probably a little bit optimistic and probably a little bit against it in previous years, but fishing in September and October was actually no worse than some of the other months that I've fished. So in hindsight it was really good, and probably I believe something that could be looked at to be opened up as a more permanent thing for the fishery to explore the prices, you know, to be able to optimise the price, I guess, throughout the whole year. The fishery seems to be tracking along not too badly now. The last couple of years it's sort of stepped back up again, and we're seeing lots of juvenile fish, lots of spawning fish.
Back then, things were vastly different. There was around 65 to 70 vessels, no quota, mainly owner-operator. It was a completely different lifestyle. You know, there wasn't as much money in lobster back then as what there is now, so it was more of a lifestyle fishery. And in the last, since we went to quota, people have sort of disappeared and consolidated licences because we've had to survive. And now a lot of corporate ownership in the northern zone, which has changed the dynamics greatly. The owner-operator system isn't really there anymore. There's probably a third owner-operator, 2/3 corporate, because we have had quota reductions, you know, for the last 20 years. So it's a completely different place. It's not as relaxed as it probably was 30 years ago. Yeah, so I think as you get older, it's harder to adjust to living on land. I even notice it at the end of a season now, to just adjust, because when you're on the ocean, that is just as home as it is on the land. So you got to come back into your life and mix with the wife and the kids and all your friends, and then I can only gather when you retire, then you have that part of your life is gone. So it's a big hole to fill. So I can only imagine some people sort of feel a bit lost, you know, finding something else to do with the rest of their lives to fill that hole. And I can imagine when I retire, I don't know when that'll be, hopefully not for a long time yet, but yeah, it'll be a big hole to fill.
Yeah, like I say, I'm skipper of Dad's boat, and I reckon this season coming up is 7 years I've been driving, so like I say, I've had the business for 2, and it's been hard during fishing. I mean, the last 2 years, the way it's gone, we've been stop-start, so I have had time to come into the shed and do my work on our days off, but in another sense, when we're fishing and we're going for it, and like I say, we're up at 3 and we're home here at lunch, and you go in, you have a quick bite to eat, and you're out to the shed till tea time, and you go in, have tea, go to bed, muck around with the kids or whatever, and it's time to get up and do it all again. And most of my mates are fishermen, or we are fishermen, or we've got something to do with fishing. Being such a tight-knit community, you know, everyone's involved, and it's hard. It's hard to see what the future is. Will it get better? Possibly. And if it does, will it be like it was? Well, we don't know. It's the future. We're fingers crossed, toes crossed that it comes back. It doesn't have to be as good, but somewhere there where it's profitable. You know, it's hard on everyone. The crews, they go down in wage, and then all of a sudden you're doing the same work for not as much money, and a lot of people have lost crews this year, and it makes it hard. And then you got to find a crew, and like we say, if it's not going to get better, it's going to be hard to find a crew. Crew do a lot of the hard work. Well, they do all the physical work. You need a crew. You need a crew to go fishing, and you need a reliable one and a good one. And
getting back to the quota and all that, it's just amazing. The fish, the undersize that you see now and that, It's just great. You're throwing fish for the future. It's all there. It's bloody good. The last 5-6 years have been phenomenal prices, catch rates and all that, and then all of a sudden to be 6 weeks into a fishing season and then just get told to stop, not even, just slow down, just to stop was amazing.
For young people getting involved with the fishery today, it's a real lifestyle. You have to really love it. You have to have a passion for the ocean, being out there, and appreciate too that it's hard on relationships.
I guess the lobster industry's changed a lot from our day when we were all owner-operators, and we were probably part to blame too. We started off buying lobster and exporting them, and all we thought about was getting more lobster to make the business more successful. And as I said, we owned 2 or 3 boats ourselves, and we leased some as well just to get the volume through the factory. But it's probably changed a lot more than that now. That there's a lot less owner-operators. And we've got companies that own a few licenses, or a quota nowadays, and some of them are New Zealand companies as well. So it's certainly changed the whole industry to, I don't know if it's to the good or the bad, but certainly in the old days, yeah, we were out there, it was very competitive, but it was like we were having a big competition with all our mates who could catch the most. And to be honest, the money part of it didn't really come into it for me. It was, if I caught more than Peter Barwick, I was really happy.
In the fishery where I fish up the west coast of the peninsula out into the Great Australian Bight, it was a fishing, you stayed out until the boat was full, or you ran out of fuel or bait. So then you start early in the morning, go in, unload, next day straight out again. You didn't get to go home too often, so when we're working a 7-month season and nearly working every day, the social life out on the water was another fishing vessel. So as soon as another boat was in the area, even though they're your competitors, you'd go aboard, have a barbecue, tea, stew, or a good feed, and quite a few beverages. But the social life out there was something to behold, with the scenery, the environment we were in was such a beautiful place, and we all respect it. It was a great time. Now we're working a lot more gear, a lot longer during the day, a lot more hours, and everybody's too tired to even think about having a get-together.
So things are not perfect by any means. There have been some big events that have brought about substantial changes. But you get the feeling that, by and large, there is still a very positive outlook for the current and future generations of fishers. The 2020 season started off like the ones before it, but things soon took a turn for the worse that can be blamed entirely on international politics. The rise of China as a superpower and the contested nature of the world order ultimately led to trade sanctions that put our fishery in a tough economic position. Unfortunately, lobsters are not a staple food. They are a luxury that can be foregone or substituted with lobsters from other countries. For example, New Zealand still exports its lobsters to China. Unfortunately, China's imperative to import our iron ore hasn't applied to our lobsters.
Oh yeah, I started off at the opening day, obviously, September 15, which was, and look, the catches were good right from the word go, and it really looked like it was going to be a great season. And obviously right up until the Chinese threw a spanner in the works, I guess, and I was pretty fortunate, I suppose. I'd caught very close to half of my quota at that time, so that was, a great thing from my point of view. So this last few months has been quite a hard slog, especially the stop-start, and therefore stop-start costs you more fuel, more bait, and all the rest of it. Obviously, fishing more days. The catches have been at good most of the season, all the season. So that, obviously, if the catches can keep continuing, will definitely will help us as far as profit-wise and keeping our costs down. So
from here on, we're anticipating that China won't be available for us to sell fish to, so the local market is going to be it. My opinion is that we're going to see some selling out. Some of these guys who arguably only own their gumboots won't be able to survive in this current climate. There will be some corporate buyouts. The family businesses are going to fall over. Or the positive side of it is the family units will get stronger.
Not the reality. The reality is we're probably in it for the long. Well, I don't think this is going to be no quick fix until they sort out some things. The consumer in China wants it. They're paying good money from New Zealand. They're paying, just for Chinese New Year, they paid $300 for one load for 5 tonne. So they want it, but the government's just standing strong.
With the advent of the price drop for lobster to China last year, which was before the start of COVID, my business here almost stopped dead for about 3 months. The effect of that price drop in China, not on craze, was just devastating to everybody.
We were allowed to go fishing 2 weeks earlier this year in September, which lines up with really good markets in China. And it was a great success. It really was. It was really good prices. The catches were good. Everything pointed to that idea being a good idea. But after that, we got into October. It was a normal October. The fishing was still good. The price was still good, and then we got hit with the shutdown. So, but apart from that, the actual September idea was probably a saviour for where we're at the moment, because if we didn't have that good start to the year now, I think there'd be a lot of people really hurting.
I think the industry's looking pretty good. Our industry is. Just a matter of sorting out the problems that we have overseas with China being our main market. I'm hoping that Australia in general and the industry learns from it a bit and says, let's really focus on other markets, including our own in Australia, and try and give people some product that, that they're proud of and they want to have their own. We've really got to promote it here in Australia. Maybe we sacrifice a few dollars for that, but in the end, we need to be able to get the most out of it, I think.
The prices, it was quite humorous really. The first year I started, I was talking to the chap who bought the boat off, and he asked me what the price that day was, and I said that was the first time they went to 10 shillings a pound. And his comment was, God, if I'd known that, I would have never sold it.
Now is a good time to see the dockside prices for the past century. We've seen John Paulson's diary from the Cutter Stella. His 1904 records show lobster catches in dozens and prices in pounds, shillings, and pence. By 1907, his catch in dozens had become bags, a term still used today, and his catches were worth the equivalent of about 6 cents per kilo. Jump ahead 55 years to 1962, and the price was 3 to 4 shillings per pound, or roughly 30 to 40 cents per kilo, at least 5 times John Paulson's price. In 1966, our currency changed to dollars and cents, and the price was the equivalent of more than 60 cents per kilo. By 1976, the price had hit the astronomical high of $3 to $4 per kilo. To understand a century of prices, they all need to be set to a standard year, and for this purpose, 2020 was used. The history is presented in the graph that shows the prices at various times from 1907 to 2020. This is obviously from various sources of information, and they are all individually colored to show that. The key point to take from the graph is the rapid rise in price when the fishery began to export the catch. But we should also note that the real price of lobsters has dropped back now to where it was nearly 30 years ago. Some members of the public were quick to notice lower retail prices for lobster following China's import ban, and it's highly likely that more Australians have had lobster on their dinner tables than they've had for many years. While lower prices have benefited domestic consumers, this has come at a cost to industry, as we've heard. It's impossible to know how long the Chinese market may be closed to us, but the thawing of relations between our countries is promising. In the meantime, our exporters continue looking for new markets, but finding another China with more than 5 million millionaires and possibly 1,000 billionaires is impossible. So some fishers have marketed their own catch in search for better prices, and a new co-op grew out of the market stresses that began even before China banned our lobsters.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Would you like to buy a lobster?
Yeah, can I get 2 kilos?
Yeah. There's a but though.
Oh, alright. You do take cards, don't you?
Yes, I do. Is it still written on the van? Because you're about the 8th person today.
No, we're all just blind.
Oh, that one's faded a little
We're
bit.
so excited to get it. So we're just like, quick, before he sells out.
Just railed on the crayfish, not worry about reading the post. 2.15 is 139,
yeah,
and there's 4 of them.
Beautiful.
I started the thought of selling to the community from out of the van, out of the back of my ute, because Australia and China had their little hissy fit, and it was like we had to stop fishing. We had no markets, we had nowhere to store our crays, we had nowhere to sell our crays. So I pretty much built a tank and hit the road selling crayfish. In the last 12 months, the furthest I've been has been to Berry. I've been across to Adelaide, Keith, Narracourt. That's pretty much about it. Bordertown. I've been over to Hamilton. You know, so I could pretty much say that my average this season is going to be pretty close to being spot on to $64 a kilo. The customers, the people that are arriving to buy them, they are ecstatic with the freshness, and we won't even get started talking the price. They just love where my price is. I seem to be, for our crayfish, Southern Zone rock lobster, I am pretty much the cheapest in Australia.
We're in grain farming. We know what
we
know what the Chinese influence is like.
Yeah, no, you know all about it then. I've caught 4.5 tonne, which end of May.
Usually, how many months?
We start in, they pulled it forward so that we could try and get a festival in China. Surprise, surprise. Yeah. you won't get it in there with your mask on, I'm afraid.
Co-op itself has steadily grown, and we saw after our first year of business trading, there was 23 members at the end of that first year. And then during the winter, this last winter just gone, we managed to build our members up to 39, which was huge, and people were jumping on board because they could understand what we were trying to do, and they could see that it was actually going to happen. We've got representation from one end of the coast to the other. We've got them from Kingston, Cape Jaffa, Rowe, the whole way through, Beachport South End, right through to Port MacDonnell. We've just finished building a facility in Beachport, which looks after the northern end of the coast, with our trucks picking up crays from wherever they're landed up there, taking to the Beachport facility, and then bringing them down to Port MacDonnell, which is our hub. Everything happens from Port Mac. That's where we pack our crays out of for export. Yeah, so I suppose there was a little bit of talk around the place a few years before we even went down the road of developing the co-op. And it was about little buyers getting pushed out by bigger buyers and Australian-owned companies going by the wayside, and we could see this sort of rationalisation and corporatisation of the industry coming in, and we didn't want to get to the stage of we're just working for them and being dictated to. So a group of guys got together and sort of flagged that we should try and do something. The only way forward we could see was looking at the model that Jarrod Fish Company had taken on over in Western Australia. We went over there, we come back, we held an industry meeting to see if other fishermen would be interested in going down that line, whether we'd get enough support to even take it on, because it was always going to be a big job. But there was a fair bit of interest first up, and we decided to go ahead with it. It took us nearly 3 years to develop before we even got to the stage of putting a crane in the water, and lots of challenges along the way. But the group of guys that got together had a real good focus, and you could see that like the end game was going to be a good story. So we thought we'd push ahead with that. We wanted to protect all the little fishermen, the family-owned businesses and things like that, and obviously keep the money in the communities and in the region. And you know, we love our fishery the way it is. We just didn't want to see that change too much at all. Everybody's really happy what they do. The fishermen love their jobs. The family life is great, and the way the community bounces around the actions of the fishermen, and whether it's a good year or a bad year, it reflects a lot on how the community goes. And it is a big reason why we got the co-op going. We wanted to make sure that little fisherman could survive, or the family business could survive. I myself's got a son that's mad keen fishing. He wants to kick me off the boat now, and he would tomorrow if he got the opportunity. But it's all about there's up and coming families that want to have their family take on the same thing and enjoy the same things that we've enjoyed.
Work hard at staying strong in what we're doing. Loyalty, honesty, integrity is utmost in this industry. It has to be that way. There's a lot of trust involved, and it just, if we can keep that together, we'll go places. It will survive.
Yeah, the co-op to me has just been a great thing, especially the knowledge, the information you're getting from day to day to fishermen now is just, quite valuable. Look, I know behind the scenes the work that the co-op guys are doing, the management role, are just working continuously, tirelessly to find more markets. They've been doing a fantastic job. We've been able to keep the markets just slowly flowing, finding new markets, and which is, as I said, very tough. There's a lot of fish coming in short spaces of time, which is really tough for the management side of things to keep moving these fish. So the co-op's just been invaluable.
At this point, you'd perhaps have the impression that the fishery relies only on men. Of course, this is far from the truth. Women have played many different support roles, and without them, the fishery would not have been nearly as successful as it has been. Let's hear from and about the women.
During fishing season, you had to be mother and father. As it became sports, for instance, because he was always out fishing, it was up to you to get your children to go to sports, and you had to do that kind of thing. And when they fished for a fair few days in a row, they would get tired and irritable, so it was your job to keep those children quiet while he went to bed to sleep. So at times it was tough. during fishing season for that reason. The other side of it is worry. We had those days, I think it was a UF on the kitchen. I would not go to town, I would not go to Mount Gambier and go shopping unless I've spoken to him. If it's a rough day, if I'd spoken to him and he was on his way in. Women's Industry Network was established. I was the representative for the southeast zone. So what it was us women got together and wanted to help our husbands and promote the fish. So to promote the fish, we used to go to the shows, Mount Gambier show in particular, and we would make crayfish or lobster sandwiches.
Simon was on skippering a boat. He had a deckhand in Tom Wilkes, and his sister at 22 decided, Penny, that she would like to go fishing. So the father said, well, you can go fishing on 5%, but when the boat goes, you go. And she was a bit of a party girl, and but she did it, she loved it. She went for 2 years, and there was no job for Penny, and I think to this day she regrets that, but she loved it. So, and probably, I think only one of 2 girls that ever crewed like full time on the whole of the coast. So that was a bit of a feather in her cap, I think. So wives in fishing probably didn't, well, we coped, but things were very difficult. I had 4 children in 5 years, so I was fairly busy. And Gary was not home a lot, and sometimes when he was home, like we said, he went to the hotel and did all those sorts of things. So the women, we had to be strong. Some women weren't strong, some marriages didn't last, and there was a lot of pressure on the women as much as there's pressure on the men, because back then when there was no quota, they went in all sorts of weather. Just as an aside, when Penny was fishing, I would have 4 of my family at sea on some of the roughest of rough days, and that was difficult. I didn't have mobile phone or anything like that, couldn't speak to them, but it was a worry. But I guess my family probably thought it was a good life because both the 2 boys ended up going fishing. Yes, I'm just sitting here in my house and I can see 3 houses and every one of them belong to fishermen across the creek. So, yes, we've done okay.
Without Anne, I would have I wouldn't have achieved a lot of things, because I'm not very good on any sort of paperwork. But she's done that, and also she's been out on the boat and she knows how it all works, which is a big help for her as well. Because when we start talking about something and we need her to do something for us, well, she understands because she's already got her head around the situation. So on top of that, she brought up 2 kids as well. So she's done a great job there, and there's many other women involved in the industry too. Even in the old days, my mum used to buy the stores and take them up to Halls Bay. And remember, there was no phones and no contact, so sometimes she'd drive to Halls Bay thinking that they'd be in there, and they wouldn't be there, so she'd have to go home again and try again the next day. So yes, the women are a big part of the fishing industry.
Yeah, when we were up the head of the Bight, quite often we'd spend 3 or 4 days, 5 days out. Stores would come up, we'd unload, and then after a few weeks, my wife would come up. That was very important for fishermen, to have a wife that come up with more food, and because there was a lot of fishermen that, you could see that they didn't, and there was a lot of relationships break down in the fishing industry. But happy wife means a good life. Well, that's what my wife told me.
This short chapter really doesn't do the women justice, and it could or should have been much more comprehensive. Hopefully you'll forgive this shortcoming. Although South Australia's open coastlines are far from benign places to work, the lobster fishery is not terribly dangerous these days. Boats have become much safer than in the early days. But there are still some risks and some very sad stories from the past. And of course there are many interesting and some amusing stories as well, a few of which are told here.
Anyway, him and his brother-in-law, they decided that they'd build a boat, see? And the big Jarrod keel came from Western Australia on one of the coastal ships. And when they got it here to the jetty, it was so big and long they couldn't get it down the jetty. So my father heaved it over the jetty and then got a rope on it with the dinghy and towed it across. And he went and got my grandfather's horse. They hooked him up to the big Jarrod keel and they drug it down the road and around into the yard. Never built a boat before, no. And anyway, Dad said, he said some of the old fishermen used to come around there and they'd be looking at it, you know, whether this is going to work or whether that's going to work. But, he said she was a good boat. She was the only clinker cooter boat there was around. And Dad said that's what made her such a good sea boat, because she was a clinker. And as they come in, they run into the southerly. He said, and then we were into it. And he said the sail would get wet halfway up. He said there was that much water coming over. They had big old hand bilge pumps made out of down pipe with a big plunger on the bottom. And that's because those cooter boats are all big open boats, nothing to keep the water out of them. And they'd be slogging the water out of them when they got a fair bit in there.
I was fishing inside the reef and I got too cheeky and went in to get a pot, and I got one and I come back out, and then I decided to go in and get the other, and when I got in, the rope was around the wrong way, and I made a decision to try and go around instead of going across it, and of course I run out of time, and all I had time was to turn around and front up to it, so I took it on head on and backed off as I went up. She just picked me up and turned me around, and next thing I'm going back the other way, and then she just slowly filled me up and rolled me over. I knew what was going on, so I just got back into the wheelhouse and held on and put my head up against the wall and just let it go over with her. And she turned upside down, and I thought, well, this is it. I remembered I knew where I was. I had to remember I had to go out that way to get away. If I go the other way, I'll go out past the winch and the pot tipper. I've got to go the other way where it's clear. And I thought, well, this is it. And I made a swim for it, and I could see daylight, and I got out the other side. So Fred Stanky come and picked me up. He came and picked me up, and we ended up getting the boat home and redoing it and building it again. So, yeah, been a bit cheeky that day.
Worst memories? Being on a shallow lump and getting a pot fouled around the rudder, and I was working on deck, and a wave broke on us, and I broke my jaw and got 15 stitches in my head. So yeah, that was a pretty exciting moment for a bit. We actually filled the dinghy up on the davits on the back of the boat, so it's a reasonably big wave. So yeah, that's one of my worst memories, I think, and it makes me very cautious of the swell and the sea as well.
A lot of real heavy old boats and not very good moorings, and you'd get up in the morning and see the sea and the wind's blowing. You don't go down and have a look at the sea, you go down and have a look along the beach. We had five on the beach there one morning. Just hook onto the bulldozer and pull them out. Most times they didn't do much damage. They never insured them in them days because it was too much to insure them, so you just fixed them up. It was in 30 fathom. I just picked up a load of pots and was shooting them off. And the head float to this pot and the head float to the next pot will tangled up. So you know the old John who used to have a stick, put her in and out of gear just outside the door. Well, whacked her in reverse, grabbed hold of it, and then all of a sudden, boom, over I go. And when I'm in the drink, all I can hear is this fella. What a horrible noise. And we used to have thigh boots on in them days. And you can't get them off. The pressure sucks them onto your legs. No, that was scary. And we did lose a deckhand. Poor bugger. Dead flat sea. He worked with old Bill McCracken. And they were pulling pots to the sea, flat. They pulled a couple of lines of pots and old Bill drove up to the next pot and turned around. Where's Kevin gone? He looked all around the boat, went back to the pot they just chucked off. Never found him. Never found him.
Where I was transiting fishing spots with my father in a high-powered small aluminium fishing vessel. It was only about 33 foot long, tri-hull, had 400 horsepower in it, twin motors. As we were passing past Point of Void, heading to Golden Island, my father took the decision to take a shortcut. And as we were travelling through this shortcut, I looked up at this wave out to the side of us and I said to my father, look at this one. And next minute the boat was getting shoulder rolled. And I can still see the water today hitting the windscreen of that boat, the windows of the boat. And then I thought I had the last breath of air I was ever going to have, but then my head hit the wheelhouse floor and I realised there was a pocket of air. So I turned round and I said to my father and felt him there and I said, I'm going to try and get out of here. And so he said, go, but he can't remember saying it. I dived down to the wheelhouse door and pushed it open because you think the boat's going to the bottom. Then I got to the pot winch and I was thinking, oh, there should be a big pile of ropes here somewhere. There wasn't. Bulwarks, I stuck my head there, I saw daylight again and the surface was only 2 foot up. And so I got out of there and then I thought I was safe. But then the next feeling I'd never forget also was my father was still stuck inside the boat. And it's one of the worst feelings in the world when you're thinking, well, I might survive and what am I going to say to the rest of the family if I'm the only one to get out? But as chance happens, another wave hit the boat. The boat righted itself and hung like a cuttlefish backbone, stern down. So I stood on the foredeck, bashed on the windows, and this grey white face looked at me. I thought, hell, he's alive. That's amazing. And as I was standing there, I could hear the air rushing out of the vents of the wheelhouse, and that's a horrendous sound because you knew it's only a matter of minutes the boat was going to go completely down with my father in it. But as chance happened, he managed to work out which way he was meant to get out, and he also dived down and come out onto the boat, onto the foredeck, and that was an amazing feeling. And as we're standing on the foredeck, I said to my father, we'll swim across to Golden Island there, which was sort of across the wind a bit, and my father said to me, be stuff if I'm sitting on some island waiting for somebody to rescue me, we'll swim downwind, which was twice as far and on the beach. And his was the right decision. But as we're swimming along, I grabbed a set of floats and wrapped them around under my arms, and I could swim quite easily. My father had a couple of 4-litre oil containers and hung onto one, and he had to swim one arm. But as we got into the surf line, I swapped because he was struggling. I grabbed the oil container and just shoved it up my shirt under my chin, and I could swim perfectly with the container holding my head out the water, and I could body surf in. My father had these floats, one under each arm, and I'd look behind. He was in the white water and you could see these floats just whacking him on the head. So I did just go back out into the surf and help him in, but when I got to the beach, your adrenaline's running so hard, you just can't stand still. My father, who was 50 at the time, was on the beach with hypothermia with a lovely lady, Di Bryant. She was hugging him for hypothermia, which I think about it now, maybe he didn't have it, but he enjoyed the hug. But I did say to my father, that's the fastest set of 42 pots I've ever done in my life. And yeah, to that day, I won't forget.
Yeah, over the years I've lost a few friends on the sea. In fact, I lost my uncle and my 2 cousins. And I can remember playing them when I was only 8 or 9 years old when they went. But on the Lincoln Star, they were, Barry was 21 and Robert was 13. And Uncle Eric was probably only 40 odd. And they went to sea with 7 on the boat. They went to sea on a new tuna boat, 44-footer, which was a big boat then, but not now, and they never came home.
You know, one Christmas Day, because we always worked Christmas Day, we were coming home Christmas Day and got into a bit of trouble coming in the channel, and things were a little bit hairy for a minute. And I just turned around to Dad and looked at him and I said, that's what we get for fishing Christmas Day. And that sort of thing. So my nephew worked with us for a while, and so my dad and my nephew and myself were in the dinghy. Nobody went fishing. Sorry, Snow Smith went fishing from here. And a couple of blokes from Portland turned up in a rigid inflatable that they borrowed from the lifesaving club down there, and it tore in half. You know, we picked one of them up. It tore the rubber ring off of the bottom and the outboard, everything. We picked one of them up. Yeah, that was unbelievable. It's not a very nice spot at times.
Peter Barwick years ago was a real good generator, a bit of fun. He'd at Elliston, we'd go ashore on a certain day and we'd all bring a crayfish in. It'd get put in a 44-gallon drum at the back lawn of the pub there at Elliston, and they'd pull it off. They'd have a circle around the outside. All the locals would bet on the lobster that would have numbers on their backs. First one to crawl out over that line on the outside would win the whole lot, which would be about 10 or 15 lobsters. So that's a really big deal. It's good for the fishermen, good for the pub there, and all the locals had a fantastic time. They'd cooked up all these lobster and got to take them home and give them away to friends. So there was things like that. And we also had a pig on the spit sometimes at Avoid Bay on the beach. Years ago, that was a really good thing too. You always get together and have a bite to eat and spin a few yarns.
Different times, you used to see some strange things. I recall once being up the head of the Bight, probably 15 mile this side of Twin Rocks, and a couple camels walked down the beach. Just things like that were, you'd never see them. I'd never seen a camel before, and to see one walking along the beach was good. Coming in to unload in Fowler's Bay used to always be a treat. When you'd see a fish buyer send up a fresh loaf of bread, litre of milk, and quite often there was a carton of beer. For that 600 Ks, they used to have to come to pick our fish and drop our bait off. And there was a fish buyer called Lenny Famazos with the fish factory. He was amazing.
Well, we're talking about the good old day, you know. And I remember we used to be able to 4 boats there, 1 dinghy. We used to be go out there, the first to come on, go to Rowe back to go grabbing the rest. The next one, go back and grab the next one. And after a few years, we can afford to buy another dinghy. And there was only 2 boats, and one dinghy was not too bad. We was improved a fair bit. After a few years that, we can afford to buy a dinghy each. And we was very happy about that. My arms stretched a little bit longer to roll it and go pick them up the rest. And then sometimes we're talking about the good old day, you know. Nice to remember, but, you know, it's much better now, put this way.
They used to keep the crays in big wooden crates behind the boats, and they had been 5 or 6 weeks and no buyer had turned up. So they towed the crates out to sea a couple of miles, took the lids off and turned them upside down and emptied all the crays out. Towed them back in time, went back to the moorings and they went back fishing again. And I said, well, what happened then? I said, well, if the buyer had come back next, no, he said, she was all right. He said, it didn't take us long. He said, we had the crates full again. He said, and we just got them full again, he said, and the buyer turned up. So he said, we were a bit lucky.
Back in the late 80s, we had a dog on the boat, a little staffy called Buster. We were steaming between Coffin Bay and Pearson's Island. It was one of those glassy days that you don't see very often. Dolphins jumping around everywhere. Buster used to get up on the bow of the boat and bark at them. I think this day he got a bit too cocky. He went up there and he fell in. Not that we knew, we were steaming along and I said to the decky, where's Buster? And we looked around, we couldn't find the dog. So what we did, we turned around, we steamed back the course we'd come from. It felt like we were steaming for a long, long time, but it was probably only about, 10 minutes. We could see this pod of dolphins jumping around, carrying on. So we headed over to it, and here was Buster in the middle. We thought, Jesus. So we got alongside, we put the gaff in the collar, pulled him on board, and we thought to myself, geez, what one lucky little dog.
I was working as a deckhand for Charlie Bowick was a skipper. He was fair, but he was a very tough man. And we were sitting on deck in the Void Bay, finishing tea, beautiful calm night evening. And I went to scrape the scraps over the side and I dropped the knife and fork. Well, I got into trouble for that. The old fella put on a hell of a turn. To that point where I had to free dive in a Void Bay to try to retrieve the knife and fork, and it was pretty deep there in a Void Bay. I was fit in them days, like I am now, and I got the knife back but couldn't find the fork. Well, I was still in trouble for the rest of the trip. So it wasn't easy times. I was out fishing from a Void Bay out around the islands and I got a call on the radio saying my wife was due to have her first baby and to come in immediately. So I raced in, I got flattened the old sea gift, the old cutter I had, and we got up to 7.5 knots. We was really chaffing along. Got into a Void Bay and got in my Toyota and flat out through Coffins, flat out into the Port Lincoln, straight up the hospital, raced into the maternity ward, see how my wife was going, and the sister come out and she said, Mr. Power, you do have time to go home for a shower. I've been out for 5 days.
There's probably been about 3 occasions that's really, really worried me that what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? But, soldier on, put a brave face on for the decky, not to show that you're scared. But there has been a couple of times that, it shouldn't have been there.
And probably fishermen think how lucky they are to be out there in a beautiful environment catching lobsters. It's the probably best job that you could ever get.
From where it all started, like it's an incredible story, and I couldn't be more prouder of it actually. My father and my uncles came from Italy, came from the mountains of Italy, never seen an ocean in their lives, and came over to Australia and come to a little place called Southend and jumped in fishing boats and went fishing. And no one showed them how to do anything. They had to figure it all out themselves. They teamed up with Albert Luciano Galley, and between the six of them, it's an incredible story. What they've did, they all work very hard. They're probably the hardest working people I've ever seen. In their younger days, they'd fish big days and come home late. As they got older, with their making pots, they'd come home from fishing midday, 1 o'clock, early afternoon, then they'd be down the shed welding cray pots and making cray pots and that till 4 or 5 o'clock at night. So they certainly work for everything they've got, and it's an incredible story actually. It's sort of something to be very proud of.
Going into small communities like Venus Bay, I remember going in and tying up alongside the jetty there one afternoon with my cray boat, and there was a couple there maybe in their 40s, and I remember they were looking down at us at the vista of the boats coming in and what's going on, and she just sort of waved and said hello and said, "Don't ever give up what you're doing there." And I thought, well, okay, I must have a pretty good lifestyle compared to some, so.